go, and wherever that was, it wasn't on a jet plane. Since no elephant lift of this scope had ever been contemplated, much less attempted, no one was sure at the time if any of them would make it to Florida alive.
You get back.
So begins one of the more unusual animal odysseys of history. These baby elephants are frightened. For wild animals, this is a hardship, and their future is full of unknowns. But at least the passengers of this airborne ark are alive. That's more than can be said for their families. To give the elephants the best chance of surviving their trip, their time inside the plane had to be kept to a minimum. So a precise timetable had to be met. The plane had to be off from Wanky just before sundown and arrive in Florida just after sunrise the next day. That was not an arbitrary schedule. The plane had to take off before darkness since the Wanky Strip is deep in the bush and has no lights. Smashing into an unseen animal at takeoff speed would have made a big batch of elephant stew. That wasn't the only problem.
Yeah. You haven't got much more than
We got about
15 minutes.
Hey, Chuck, we only got about 15 minutes. We better get. You want to get an engine going, Hank?
Since there is no power at the strip capable of kicking a jet engine into action, Jones and his crew had to bring along their own starter. If it didn't catch, the elephants would have to be unloaded and the whole operation jeopardized.
Crank up this engine. Stay away from it.
Meanwhile, the sun kept going down, and Jones, now with his elephants aboard, had to round up his people.
Buck, take that damn vehicle and run over there and tell those people to get here now.
I'll go with it.
Finally, the starter took hold and got the engines running. Very little light left now. In a few moments, there would be none, and for the first time, Arthur Jones looked worried. Finally, everything was aboard. A full load of fuel brought by trucks from hundreds of miles away, 20 people, including the 2020 crew, and the 63 confused and unhappy baby elephants. There was still a little light left, enough to see the length of the runway, and everything was ready to go. Well, almost. The last hatch to close suddenly got stubborn and wouldn't. One little detail in a complex operation, for a moment, threatened to torpedo everything. But just as the last splash of sunset washed over the Wanky Preserve, the crew forced the door closed and the 707 started its run down the airstrip. With 40,000 pounds of elephants aboard, it was a long run. After eating up 65 seconds worth of runway at an eventual ground speed of 250 miles an hour, the big jet finally dragged itself out over the trees, and the 22-hour trip to the west was underway. All night long in the spooky half-light of the cargo bay, the ghostly figures of the handlers moved around the pens, feeding, petting, trying to reassure the frightened elephants, none of whom had volunteered and who couldn't comprehend what it meant to be 39,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Traveling in the same direction as the sun, but at only half its speed, we were caught by the next day's dawn a couple of 100 miles off the Florida coast, right on schedule. The handlers made a daylight inspection of their charges and were relieved to find, so far at least, that all the babies were still alive. And if their robust voices were any indication, they intended to hold their grudge over the indignities they had suffered. As we made our initial approach to Jones's private airstrip in Ocala, the first phase of Operation Elephant Lift was over.
You got to do first things first. First, you got to rescue the animals, which would otherwise have been killed, and we've done that. What happens next, we'll take it step by step.
And after a 16,000-mile round trip, we were home. The largest herd of African elephants in captivity then had to be unloaded, a much easier operation than getting them into the plane. They became the newest residents of what amounts to the Arthur Jones Private Wildlife Preserve. The baby elephants didn't seem to care about residency, though. After being penned inside the plane for 22 hours, All they wanted was water and lots of it. Then it was time to roam around and get acquainted with their new home. Some of them even got a little playful. And when a 1,200-pound elephant gets playful, it can ruin a cameraman's whole day. It doesn't do a whole lot for the camera either. As they became accustomed to their new home, they also seemed to be getting used to having people around.
Why'd you do it?
Because I like elephants and because nobody else is doing it, and it's very unlikely that anybody else will do it. And I simply could not live with myself if I idly stood by and watched the African elephant become extinct.
The extinction of the African elephant,
Come here, baby.
that's a matter of debate. At least its timing is. Many authorities say the species is not in danger yet. You can really have it on authority either way. So if Arthur Jones is wrong, it really doesn't matter. There'll simply be a few extra elephants roaming around somewhere in Florida. But if he is right, Florida could be one of the few places on Earth where your grandchildren will be able to see a herd of live African elephants.
Roger, I am as fascinated by Arthur Jones, this crusty eccentric, as I am by those sweet baby elephants. Who is Arthur Jones? Where did the money come from?
He has been rich and poor many times. He was a TV producer, he made a couple of features, and then, Barbara, he invented the Nautilus Gymnasium equipment system, and now he's